I'm Althea Waits, my colleague Professor Jarvis and Professor Moni Simeonov. And we're here to talk today about performance anxiety. I suppose that there's no one in this room who has not experienced that at some point in their lives, especially if you are a performer. I mean, you can have anxiety from a lot of things, but since you're all music students, we can kind of address that as our primary focus today. I wanted to start by maybe just mentioning a couple of things about what I have done in the past to relieve it and to talk about what it is, to identify it, and then think about ways to overcome it. I think that being anxious is a common thing. It's not something unusual. I mean, you can be anxious about your financial situation. You can be anxious about getting in your car if the traffic is congested on the freeway. Some driver cuts in front of you and you can be upset about that, or I wish he or she would move. I mean, there are all kinds of events in life that generate anxiety, so it's perfectly natural. It's not something that's unusual. I think with performing, though, it's a little different because you're bringing your focus into preparing a piece of music, and you want to do it as well as you possibly can. And then there are little things, perhaps, that may come in to either prevent you from doing that, or you go through it, but you're always thinking, oh gee, I wish I could have done that better, or how come I'm still having these issues. One of the things that used to really bother me at great length when I was as young as you are, and that was about 1 million years ago, I used to throw up before every performance. And sometimes it would happen when I hadn't really had a full meal or anything like that, and I think it really had to do with nerves. So my mother used to give me Pepto-Bismol and all of that about an hour before my performance, and that always helped. And then when the performance was over, I would go right back in and have the same reaction again, so it was like a temporary stopgap. In later years, I'd say for the past 30, 35, 40 years of my career, I started doing yoga. And my daughter, who is a professional singer, is also a yogi, and she gave me some wonderful breathing exercises and things that I could do. I've had several surgeries, so I was always challenged about doing all of that and getting on the floor and all of that, but she started me with simple breathing exercises, and I found that when I do them on a regular basis before a performance, it really helps me to stay centered. And when I'm playing, I'm completely immersed and involved in the music so that I don't think about, uh-oh, what if I make a mistake? I mean, that's negative thinking, and you have to block that out. You never want to go into a performance thinking about, if I make a mistake, what's going to happen? If I have a memory lapse, what's going to happen? And sure enough, you fulfill your own prophecy. If you go in, you're conditioning yourself to fail. But in any case, the yoga exercises and centering like that really helped me. I do a lot of breathing. Sometimes even when I'm not playing, I wake up in the morning and I do stretching and all kinds of things like that. It really helps because we're using our whole bodies as we play and as we sing, whatever it is we happen to be doing as musicians. And so it's not just a matter of using only our hands or our arms. I mean, you're bringing your total body and all of your mental and emotional capacities into focus when you perform. And although people may say that it's easy, I think everybody in the room knows that it's not. And the more that you know about the art of performance, the more you have to bring to it, because you have a big responsibility as a musician to carry that into everything that you play. So that's one thing that has really, really helped me. I do a lot of stretching and breathing, and as I get older, I have to say I have to, because in order to maintain what I do, I can't just sit down and go bump, 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 bump. I mean, there are a lot of other things that have to go with it. And because I've had health issues, and I continue to have health issues, what that means is that I have to do everything that I can in order to keep my body in good shape so that I can go on. And that has to do with diet, exercise, the whole kit and caboodle. So again, it was the yoga that really helped me, and of course the breathing that really made a big difference in my life. So I owe a great deal to my daughter for helping me to work that out. So I'm going to turn it over now to Professor Jarvis and to my colleague Moni here, so that they can talk to you about their experiences. And then we all have some things that we can refer you to help you to go along with that. So I'll come back in a little later.
Okay. Well, I wrote a couple articles on this subject that were published, and so it's something that has been a big part of my thought process as a performer and as a teacher, because I've noticed, more as a conductor, the different symptoms that I would see people in performing groups. More at the high school level, because I was dealing with a lot of, before I came here, dealing with a lot of all-state groups and so forth. And since I've come here, I've noticed people completely at ease in rehearsals, but a little bit less at ease during concerts. And so what I wanted to talk about briefly, because we're going to try to keep the lecture portion of what we're doing about 10 minutes, is just recap a few things having to do with the symptoms and then a few strategies for overcoming them. Performance anxiety is something that affects a lot of people, a lot more people than you think. The statistics, if they're true, say 21% of females and 10% of males suffer from it. I think it's probably pretty even, myself. People that you would never imagine had stage fright have it. Barbra Streisand, Carly Simon, actors like Sir Laurence Olivier. These were people who were deathly afraid of getting in front of an audience even after they were mega famous. So it's something that affects a lot of people. It's just a matter of how you perceive it and what you do to get over it. We're all pretty much hardwired for what they call a fight or flight type of situation, which means if we feel that we're being confronted in some way, we're either going to fight it or we're going to run away from it. The problem is our system can't differentiate between the clear and present danger and a perception of that. And so our adrenaline starts to flow, our hands start to tremble, we get dry mouth, all kinds of things can happen, your heart starts to race. I know people that have, for instance, I know one person that said he never got nervous, but he always got dry mouth when he would play. He was a trumpet player. And so he would scrape the inside of a lemon rind and then do this, and when the piano player is playing during the recital, he'd just do, it looked like he was cleaning his fingernails, but what he was doing was trying to get more saliva flowing in his mouth so he'd be able to play. One of the big problems that we have is we tend to treat the symptoms and not the cause. People will go to extraordinary lengths to get rid of stage fright, such as even medicating themselves or self-medicating. I knew people that would actually drink before they would play. And I'm sorry, a belt of scotch is not going to make you any less nervous. It's just going to make you drunk, Or if you take beta blockers or all kinds of artificial ways to deal with it, you're still treating symptoms and not the actual cause. If you suffer from any type of performance anxiety, chances are very good that you have like an all or nothing mentality. If you could play a magnificent performance with one little error in it, and then you would focus on that error instead of all the great stuff that you did in that performance. And that's one of the biggest problems that people have is trying to learn how to demagnify those mistakes. We all have to learn to tolerate a reasonable degree of error in our playing, because oftentimes we set unrealistic goals for ourselves, such as you're playing the Haydn trumpet concerto, so you listen to another trumpet player that recorded it. Well, in today's technology with Pro Tools and everything else, that trumpet player could have done 10 takes of that, edited the heck out of it, put it together in pieces, and you'd never know it. And you're saying, oh man, I always run out of chops right at this spot here. Well, maybe he did too. and he stopped and started. And so what you're doing is you're setting an unrealistic goal. Or that person might just be way, way better than you are. So how can you expect to sound like that person? You aspire to, but you don't want to knock yourself down and berate yourself because you didn't play as well as Maurice Andre did on that concerto. We also tend to overgeneralize in our performances, and again, this is part of being a part of the negative thinking that Althea was talking about, just trying to block that negative thinking out of your mind. I try to do it as much as I can. I try to look for ways that I can find a way to stabilize my emotions, because I suffer from it too. I don't think there's a time I've ever picked up my trumpet, whether I was playing at, Yankee Stadium, or whether I was, with Van Morrison, or whether I was playing for a bunch of drunk guys at an Elks Club. I still feel performance anxiety, and the reason is I want to do well. If you don't feel a little nervous when you play, it just means you don't care, okay? If you are completely calm, you're either way more centered than I am, or you just aren't, you're not putting enough gravity to the performance. So, strategies, I wrote a few of these down. The first one is very obvious, preparation. The number one reason for people having performance anxiety is they're unprepared. And that would be a reason for anybody to get nervous, because now you're saying, I hope I pull this off, and you're using this form of preparation, also denying it is futile. If you deny stage fright, again, all you're doing is you're focusing your mind on that instead of your music. And the more you think about it, the worse it's going to get. You have to give yourself credit for things that you do well, and just continually try to improve the things you don't. Here's one that I find pretty interesting: seeking eye contact rather than avoiding it. Some people try to go, if they're doing public speaking or if they're suffering from music performance anxiety, they'll try to pretend the crowd isn't there, or they try all the phony ways to do, pretend the crowd's in their underwear, all that stuff, everybody's heard those. I basically have to think of two things. The people that are there came to see me because they wanted to see me do well. The people that didn't care about seeing me stayed home. So I've already got a friendly audience, okay? The other thing is, I try to focus on somebody that I see as a friendly face. The first thing I do, and to this day, I look out in the audience, and if I'm playing, or there's a 8-bar rest while the band is playing, and I have to come in on my solo soon, I'm looking around the audience, and I see some lady or some man that's sitting there going, and they're enjoying the music. Well, immediately I focus on that person, because I know that person is enjoying what I'm doing, and I'll make direct eye contact. I'll make that person know that I noticed that he was enjoying it. And anytime I start to feel a little anxious, I look at that person, and that is one of the best strategies I can think to make myself feel comfortable. Just to end things, like I said, I get butterflies. I get butterflies every time I play. If I played for you right now, I'd get butterflies. The only difference is that I've taught them how to fly in a formation. I've learned how to control it and turn a negative feeling into a positive energy. In other words, that anxious feeling might be just the catapult that I need to play even better than I had prepared for, just because of the fact now I'm drawing energy from the people I see that approve of my performance.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way. Thank you for saying that. It's a wonderful way to put it. Because that when you think about the audience, I know in CPAC 2 weeks ago when I played, those people have come to hear the orchestra. They've come to hear me, and I'm so glad with that. Just thrilled. Yeah, they're there to hear this concert, and I'm not like overwhelmed with anxiety, but I get the butterflies too before I go out. And the fact that people are out there, and I'll look at a friendly face, I've done that, and it really does help, to kind of keep you in that zone where you know the audience is there. There's no such thing as blocking out the audience. I mean, we need to get that cleared up right now. You really do have to. You're playing for them, and they're there to support you. It's not about somebody being against you, but you have to kind of engage in that, and I think it really will help. Let's hear from Professor Simeonov.
To go along with what you guys were saying, it's so much good stuff, so much stuff that I don't have to say now. There was a famous Horowitz anecdote that after a performance of the Rachmaninoff Second Concerto, backstage, a young pianist goes and says, "Mr. Horowitz, were you nervous?" And he says, "I always get nervous." And he says, "Always?" And he says, "Yes, I always get nervous." And the young performer says, "I never get nervous." And Horowitz says, "It comes with talent." Because lots of the ignorance carries this type of, it doesn't matter how well I do, because by default I'm good, so I'm just, anything I do is going to be perceived as good. Of course, that's never the case. You have to take care of each individual thing in order to make the final product as complete and carrying your DNA as much as you can. I just maybe 3 things that are practical that you guys should think about when you're getting ready for a performance, because preparedness is the biggest thing. Otherwise, it's a double slap. You weren't prepared and you got nervous. Eh?
Yeah.
So the first thing that's really, really important for me is to run it through for people. How many times? I don't know, 20 times. Not in a row, separate days. We need to be able to see the full spectrum of the performance, and just by practicing passages, as the most talented ones of us do, because we want to take care of each individual thing, we make sure that as soon as there is something that we don't like, we go back to fix it. And that becomes an instinct, and that instinct can make a performance avalanche into something that we don't want it to be. So we need to get used to taking whatever we just played and going on, because the focus is very different. So you run it through once, and of course the first time it doesn't feel right, and the 2 friends that are listening to you in a practice room, they're like, yeah, that was fine, you should do this, 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 and that. Of course, listen to their comments, you know exactly what to do for next time, regardless of the comments. The second time is already better. Third time you start to sound like yourself. And the 4th time you say, wow, I just did things that I didn't think I was able to do in front of audience. So what you're doing is you're shortening this unfortunate gap between how well you do in the practice room and how badly you might think you're going to do in front of people. You're filling this gap with actual experiences. You're building up to it, kind of like we build from slow practice to fast practice. We're building from playing for people that are close to us in close proximity, 2 or 3 of them, until we are able to perhaps play for members of the congregation at our church, or maybe get 1 faculty member, or then play for studio class, play for what we have as the string students in the string forum, where there's 60 people listening. Build up to where you're comfortable playing for a camera that might broadcast you live for an indefinite amount of people. In my violin studio, where I just finished my studies at USC, when I first moved from the East Coast, there were 4 violin students that Midori took with her moving from New York, and some of them had a very difficult time. They were all great players, and I think it's because of that they had such shaky bow arms and such shaky vibratos and so on. But we had run-throughs all the time. Whenever one of them was about to take an orchestra audition, which is what they all ended up doing, whenever one of them was about to take an orchestra audition, he would collect us and we would go there, and he would bring pizza and then play these excerpts for us. Play these excerpts, and then we see them getting better day after day. So the first boy that started doing that, he's now in the first violin section of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. It's the highest paid orchestra in the world. The other boy is, he's the concertmaster of the Bavarian Radio Symphony now. And one girl just 2 days ago got first violin section in Philadelphia Orchestra, which is also a good group. So these kinds of things do help, because it leaves nothing to mystery, nothing to the unknown. You know exactly where you might mess up, and so you're not scared of it. And when you're not scared of it, you're making music past it. So the second thing, so the first one is running through. Second thing is getting to know what happens to you when you're nervous. For some string players, I'm talking about strings because this is what I feel like I know better. Some people get a tense right hand, so they're floating on the string, they're not using their skeletal weight to make sound. This could be easily translated into not using the air that you have in your lungs to sing or to make sound on a wind instrument. For some people, the shifts are very sloppy. For some people, the vibrato gets very shallow. Some people express too much, therefore jeopardizing the integrity of the sound. Some people express too little because they want to stay reserved and they don't want to make anything that doesn't sound the way they want it. So get to know what it is that happens to you. I guarantee you, whatever happened to you last time when you were nervous is probably going to tend to happen to you 10 years from now when you're nervous, because we have similar tendencies. So try to take care of those. For example, if my vibrato gets too tight, I will practice with a much looser vibrato right before I go on stage to remind myself what it feels like. If I use too little bow, then I'll use a lot more bow in the last few minutes before I go on stage to remind myself what that feels like. And so getting to know yourself, see how other people react to your playing. You're probably hearing similar comments about your performances, so take those comments into account. Then the last thing that I wanted to say is it's about practicing. we tend to perform the way we practice. And if we perform without the expression, it'll be very difficult to inject that expression into the performance once we get on stage or once someone else is listening, because it changes the technique. Simply said, it changes the technique. Let's say that when you're expressing, when you feel like you want to reach to the last member of the audience, you want to hold this note a little longer. Yeah, but you're using more bow, you're using more air, you haven't practiced it like that. It's like you're practicing a different piece. Let's say that you want to make this bravura passage even faster, you want to just toss it like fireworks. You haven't practiced it in that type of direction. Maybe you're placing the notes in different places so that it can be done, right? And there is a certain motion that happens that you will not have practiced if you practiced clinically. So once you know the notes, don't forget to express. Your expression will be similar. So you won't be doing different things every day. They might be slightly different, but it'll be the same direction because you're feeling the phrases the same way. You're responding to the harmonic changes the same way. Yeah. And just the very last thing, this is not practical, but it's also to go along with not blocking the audience. Sometimes this is a paradox. If we're having a conversation, we're very focused on one another. But as soon as you play or talk to more than 2 or 3 people, you don't know where to look, so it becomes all very general and very generic. And the connection is what makes things feel special. So as soon as you establish that connection, let's say that you're playing for an audience of 4,000. When you establish the connection with just one person, or you're used to establishing that connection in your practice room, when you establish that connection, each member of the audience is going to feel special. Otherwise, you think that you're playing for everyone and no one feels special because you're just talking to thin air. Yeah. So this is what I have to say about it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well said. Okay, I had one other thing because I don't want to run out of time. But when I was talking about breathing, what I'll do is type up something that we'll put on a website, and then everybody can check it out, so that way you'll have it.
So your panelists, they'll give me some references, for example. Jeff's articles, and I will talk to Dr. Bremer and see how we get them to you about that. I don't know if she might send them out.
Yeah, some really good things.
And if you don't get, you can just come. You can come and see me tomorrow morning.
Okay, I'd like to hear from you guys. Are there any questions, or would you like to give us some feedback, or maybe tell us a little bit about what you've been doing lately in terms of either dealing with anxiety or finding ways to cope with it when you perform, when you practice? Does anybody have any questions or comments?
You can be first, DJ.
Wow. Well, actually, I have a performance tonight, so this is quite relevant, actually. And I guess what works for me in terms of dealing with the anxiety of performing in front of people is like what you said in terms of focusing on like 1 or 2 members of the audience. So like you feel like you're catering to them, but that translates to catering to everybody else. Just like focusing your attention versus like spreading it mass wide, and it gets a little hectic after a while. And also, I remember we talked about this during my jury, and like there's a fine line between connecting with your audience and being too conscious of your audience. If you start thinking about like what the audience is thinking of you, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it'll screw up your performance in that regard too.
Yeah, the connection is very important, but it's, keep in mind that the audience is going to enjoy you more if you look like you're enjoying yourself. If you look like you're just really serious, you could be playing a perfect performance of absolutely killer material. And if you're just zoning in on that performance and not looking like this is an enjoyable experience for you, how can they possibly enjoy it? I mean, a great example of this, and he was by far not one of my favorite trumpet players, but Maynard Ferguson. I would play stratospheric notes, but he could play a tuning note and make people think he did something amazing because he had such joy on his face when he performed. He always looked like there was no place that he would rather be than on that stage playing for you. And if you look at somebody that is that happy about being there, I mean, I defy you to have a bad time. It's like when Steve Martin said, you know, when you play banjo, how can anybody be sad? You know, it's just you know, it's not possible. It looks like fun, you know, and if you show the joy that you're getting from that person in the audience, and that comes forth on your face, everybody in the audience is going to have a positive reaction to what you're doing. They're going to feel like, man, I'm really glad I came out tonight. Rather than hearing somebody play an absolutely perfect concerto and look like somebody just shot their dog, you know.
I was gonna piggyback on what you said about this whole thing about recording versus live performance. I think all of us know because we've all done both. You know, we have recordings and we performed live. And you know, you were saying something about how the trumpet player, it'll sound flawless. Oh, every note, wow, wasn't that fantastic? And you don't know how many takes that person went through. I know for myself, I did a recording back in 1993 where I had to do 19 takes on an arpeggio because I simply could not get it right. And on number 19, finally, you know, I got it right. But it took that many, and this is just only a small portion of the piece. It wasn't the entire piece, but every time I got to that spot, I think I had formed some kind of a mental block against it. I went, wrong note, another wrong note. And finally, you know, after take number 19, I got it. But it just goes to show that, you know, when you record, you can do an indefinite number of it, well, as long as you have the energy, you know, to go out there and do it. And nobody knows when they get the finished product what you actually went through, unless you tell them.
Especially now with the technology.
The technology is very sophisticated, you know, and in live performance, you cannot go back and say, well, folks, I didn't do that passage right, I'd like to try it again. Well, no, you can't. You have to keep going, and I think we all know that. I remember, the reason I brought that up is because there was someone who was here many years ago, I won't mention any names, who actually did that, stopped in the middle and said, well, I'm sorry, you know, that passage didn't go well, I'll try it again. And that's absolutely a no-no. You never apologize to the audience for something that didn't go well. You simply go on. And that's the big challenge of performing, well, doing anything live. You know, you not only want to convey the joy of playing it, but you certainly, if something goes wrong, it's okay. My teacher used to always say, if you get 85%, that's great. If you get 90, that's even better. But I don't know, 100%? Well, I don't know. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Because we all get nervous. I get nervous. I mean, I will not lie about that, but I've learned how to cope with it, you know, and when I go out, I just change all of that into something very, very positive. But like I said, the challenge of performing live is very, very different from doing something in a recording studio. And it doesn't matter whether it's jazz, it has nothing to do with the style. It could be classical, it could be anything you want. There is a big, big difference. And the technology now is so sophisticated, you pop a CD into your CD player, and you say, wow, oh, isn't that great? That sounds wonderful. Yeah. And technology, you know, gets you there.
Well, the problem with technology is that you can fix anything. And the good part about technology is you can fix anything. Therefore, when I listen to an LP from the 70s and hear somebody playing really, really well, the only way it got any better is if they did a whole other complete take. Whereas now, when I listen to somebody, I'm not sure whether I should really dig this person or not. Because, I mean, literally, I could say to the control room, how did that sound, guys? And the engineer says, well, Jeff, you were out of tune and your time was bad, but I got everything I need. You know, I can fix everything else. Oh, you were early on that one note, so we'll just move it over. And you're out of tune, so I'll auto tune you up a little bit to get, you know. I even knew a singer that came to one of my smooth jazz sessions that she started to sing, and I turned to the producer, I said, she's terrible. She's out of tune. He says, don't worry about that, I'll fix that. I just like the way her voice sounds, I'll fix all that. And then she, at the end of the session, she thanked me for hiring her, and she gave me her card. And on the back of the card was her auto-tune settings, which was the software that was being used so that the engineer knew what to tweak to. He would find which notes were out of tune, or which ones are flat, which ones are sharp. And rather than try to fix that, she just put the settings on the back of her card. So I thought that was interesting.
Did you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
Maybe if they have any specific questions for us.
Yeah. Anybody have any? Yeah.
So I don't have very good eyesight, and so sometimes, like, I don't know, when we try to connect the people, then
It's not about looking in the eyes, really. It's
Okay.
about feeling the connection. You can connect with your eyes closed. It's about the type of sound that you produce and whatever you're producing that sound on. It's more about connecting each note to each other note without anything else getting in the way. Because whenever you spread your concentration, then all kinds of outside factors come in. And then your phrase doesn't hold together, the soul doesn't hold together. The integrity of each individual note is broken because they're not connected to one thing. That thing could be a person. It doesn't have to be a person. It could just be you listening to it. But what they were mentioning before, when we started, is about that focus and the concentration. Whether breathing gets you there or listening gets you there, everything else needs to cease to exist except for this one thing that you're doing. And then so you don't need the eyesight to connect to them.
You know, check out, another thing to check out is when somebody's got their phone. If their phone's up like this, you're doing well. If their phone's down like this, you're not doing well. So, you know, so if you see somebody down like this, you can figure, well, I need to find somebody else to focus on. Yeah. Check where their phone is.
Yes. Anybody have any questions? Any other questions or comments about some of the things we're talking about here?
So say like in either you're waiting for a solo to happen or to come, then or the few moments right before you start playing at an audition, like I with my nerves and with placement auditions here, I normally have a good time. Like I feel like I have a good routine that I go through to get myself stabilized. But then I'll feel calm. But once I'm like right there, right about to play, I've tried some things and I've gotten better at it, but that moment right before is where it's kind of the worst for me. Like, and through your personal experiences, are there any examples you'd like to share?
To me, everything is a matter of practicing. Doesn't matter how difficult the activity is. When you practice it, it gets better. I've been, many times, as I'm sure you guys have, in the dressing room, and the overture is about to be over, and the concerto is about to start, and someone's going to come and call you to go on stage for the concerto. At that point, I'm using a hair dryer for the only purpose I can use it for, which is to warm up my hand. Everyone has a routine, but you're right, this is a very difficult time because we're the least patient when we're anxious, because it's the opposite. So we are not patient before we shift to the high note. We're not patient before the first note. We're not patient to hear all the notes in the fast passage. Of course we're not patient to go on stage, we just want this to be over with, and as soon as that happens, it's what he mentions, the flight or fight. So what if you were to run through your audition repertoire 10 times in a row, and you had your instrument in hand, and you're about to run for it, but then you put 3 minutes on your clock, on the timer. 3 minutes is nothing. You're supposed to brush your teeth for that long. It's really not so long. But then yet you're waiting and you're looking at the phone, and you're not going to start until it rings. And then that silence, the same type of silence, the same type of anxiety, maybe on a smaller scale, but you've gone through this. And this will give you the confidence that when you're waiting, when everyone else around you is losing their head, you're the one that's keeping his, because you've done it so many times. And this itself is going to give you so much more confidence. That you wait patiently until the time comes. And then you go and play, rather than, what do I do now? Because we don't practice that,
Yeah. The practicing part that Moni is talking about is critical, because everything that you do in a performance it has to do with the way that you practice it. And if you don't integrate all of that into your practicing, then when you go on stage, there'll be some new thing there that you hadn't figured out. But practicing is really where it all has to come together, so that when you perform, you have made that connection between what you've been doing in the practice room and what you're going to do. And they should not be completely different. You have to really make that connection. Everything that I practiced in the concerto 2 weeks ago, when I went on stage, it's all what I had been doing months ahead. Because if I made any changes, what's that all about? It doesn't help me, and it certainly doesn't serve the cause of the music, so you really have to integrate all of that. Start like that.
One of the things I learned at a kind of an early age by screwing it up was to play the piece all the way through.
Yeah.
How many people will practice the hard parts, okay, until they master the hard parts? But for a trumpet player, that hard part might be on the second page of a 3-page piece of music, and all of a sudden that part that I've mastered becomes a lot harder when I have to do all that slow stuff, that easy stuff before it, which makes me run out of gas a lot faster. So, and on the same token, taking things into a jazz realm, the first time I ever conducted a jazz band, I was about 26 years old, and we worked and worked and worked and worked on this piece, and then we got it to where it was just the way I wanted it to sound, and then they played it in concert, and it was not happening at all. And I realized afterwards, that was the first time we ever played it all the way through.
Wow.
It was in front of people. We always rehearsed this, rehearsed this, rehearsed this, but we never did this. So they never connected it all together into one continuous piece of expression. All we did was we did little chunks of it. We never wrote the whole essay. So that's something to keep in mind. Once you get to the point where you feel you've mastered the technical aspects of the performance, you've got to go start to finish, end to end.
Yeah. Let's have some more questions
Yeah.
and feedback from you guys. I know you all have opinions or ideas about this. Let's hear from you.
Just to sort of expand on what you guys have been saying, in terms of looking for friendly faces, I feel like that applies to every time you're performing, regardless of the situation. Yes. If you're performing for an audience, there are people there waiting for you to do well. If you're performing for a jury or a panel that you're auditioning for, they want you to do well. They're looking for good performers, so they want you to do well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if you're conducting, your players want you to conduct well because they want to sound well and they want a cohesive group. So people always want you to succeed.
Yeah, and also put yourself in the other shoes too. Be that friendly person in the audience that puts that performer at ease. The first time I adjudicated at a festival, I got a comment from the band director, secondhand, it came back to me, that he thought that the judges were laughing at his band. And the 2 other judges were telling a joke and they laugh. But all the kids see is 3 guys sitting behind a table in a dark room with a bunch of lamps. It looks like you're holding a flashlight under your chin. It looks pretty scary for a junior high or high school kid. And he saw the 2 judges laugh and they're laughing at us, they're laughing at us. And I've made it a point for the rest of my life since I've been doing that, and it's why I think I get asked to judge a lot, is that I always, even as a judge, try to be that friendly face. As soon as a band walks on stage, before they even start playing, I'm sitting there like this, waiting for them to play. I want them to feel like, yeah, that guy wants us to play, cool. I want to put them at ease. And I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And the person they're probably the most nervous of is those 3 guys sitting behind the table. Just like when you do your juries,
Yeah.
Although I try not to smile at our juries.
Yeah, that's really important, especially you mentioned that about young children who perform. I've done a lot of competitions and at various levels, and I've seen kids. I don't know, it's hard to tell when you're only listening to them for 10 or 15 minutes, 6, 7, 8, let's say from age 6 up to about 12. And I often wonder, and you can't ask them anything about practicing. They play their piece, they play from memory, and it's great, it's razzle-dazzle, all the way through, and you say, wow, But then I wonder about how they have been trained. I'm always concerned about that and what happens in the process of them learning that piece. But we try also to put I'm smiling, we try to put a friendly face on because we don't want them to feel like they're standing in front of an executioner, that they're coming in to have a nice experience for 10 or 15 minutes. And Because otherwise, you know, they carry those things with them for the rest of their lives. I mean, if you've ever had that kind of thing when you were really, really young, it's hard to overcome it. I mean, one goes through, you know, a number of emotional crises, you know, but it's important, I think, for kids to get off on the right foot, especially when they're competing. It's a big pressure cooker. So I agree with what you were saying about that.
Yeah. 5 minutes with a good teacher will make you want to play music the rest of your life. 5 minutes with a bad one.
Yep.
I quit trumpet for a year because I had a bad teacher. Pounded on my knee, said I couldn't sight read well enough. I was never going to make it in this business. And he was kind of surprised to see me about 15 years later when I was called in to play with the Phoenix Symphony as a sub because they needed somebody that could play ledger lines that the orchestral players weren't playing. And he was the assistant conductor. And he said, "You look awfully familiar." I said, "Yeah, you told me to quit trumpet about 15 years ago." But I quit for a year, and then all of a sudden an elementary band director came into the system, and my friend of my mom said, "You ought to try taking lessons from this guy." I said, I'm just not interested in it anymore. He said, "Just take a lesson with him." He made me love music again. Because he allowed me to make mistakes. He allowed me to be a learner. He allowed me to be awkward. And he tried to make me better. And he wasn't even that good of a trumpet player himself. But he made me like music. And that's important.
Yeah.
Be the friendly face.
Anybody have any comments or any other questions?
Um,
Speak up.
so essentially, I'm gonna actually twist this a bit. So how would you communicate these ideas about performance anxiety, like the way that you communicate to us, but now how would you pass this on to like a middle school, elementary school demographic? Like just say if I were in like your shoes, having this clinic but with elementary kids and middle school kids.
You mean to get them to feel comfortable with?
Yes.
Well, you have to, of course you have to prepare. I mean, preparation is everything, especially, well, I mean, whether you perform, whether you teach, no matter what it is, you want to be sure that you've got all of your ducks, so to speak, lined up in a row. But you do have to be positive, and you've got to, I think, avoid talking down to children. You know, they can tell. I know this from going into. I used to do a lot of school concerts when I started out, and when I came to the West Coast, and we had there was a group called Young Audiences Inc. They're based on the East Coast, but I think I don't know if they're even in existence anymore. But anyhow, one of the things we used to do is go into the schools, you know, in the morning and do these little concerts, little 30, 45-minute shows. You know, we would talk about music, get the kids to sing, do all of that. And then the LA County Music Center has an educational component, and it's really great. But going back to what you were saying, you have to avoid talking down to children. You have to use language that is appropriate, but also enthusiastic. When you're working with them, whether you're in a large group or whatever, you have to really get their attention by being enthusiastic and positive and confident about everything that you are doing and everything that you're going to tell them or to teach them. That's really important, I think. And the language that you use, and I'm speaking now just in terms of, like I said, not talking down to them. Okay, little boys, we're gonna do this. No, it's just we're gonna go to the sandbox. You know, you don't really need to do all of that. But talk to them as if they really want you to, you know, be welcoming and all of that, and act like they know what they're doing, you know, so that you have you establish that connection right off. Don't talk to them as if you feel like they don't know anything, because a lot of them come in with different experiences. Of course, in the schools now, you're going to have children from many diverse backgrounds. Some who haven't had any inkling about what music is all about. So you have to deal with that too. You know, there are a lot of challenging situations in the schools, but I think you have to start by being positive and being well prepared to come up with, to face any obstacle that you would run into. You know, you can't be deterred by that. You know, that's how.
You may have noticed by dealing, you're already dealing with younger kids right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The one thing that, for all of you, that I would caution you not to take too seriously is the feedback that you see or don't see on younger kids' faces. Mm-hmm. When I'm talking to adults, talking to you, talking to, well, I'm going to say college age and above, when I'm talking, I'm going to see this. Oh yeah, a little feedback. Oh yeah, I agree with that. Oh yeah, I get that. You talk to a kid, it's like, And you see a whole auditorium full of that. And I can tell you right now, anytime I've done a middle school clinic or something like it, I'm exhausted at the end of that because I'm trying so hard to win these empty little faces, you know, and they're not going to give you that feedback. As a father, I knew this because when my daughter was little, I'd be lecturing her on something and she'd be sitting there looking out the window. And now she's 25 and she can tell me everything I said. It all gets in there. They just don't know how to show it on their face.
Yeah.
So don't take that as a barometer of how successful or unsuccessful you are when you're dealing with younger people, because they just haven't learned how to express it
Yeah.
visually yet.
Yeah. I think if you do that, it will definitely make a big difference. You know, my daughter is well past the teen years, you know, but she can tell me everything that I just said. Well, Mom, you know, you said that already, so can we move on to the next point? You know,
Yeah.
let's cut to the chase.
Yeah, we start re-explaining ourselves because we think we're not going through.
Yeah.
I'll just add something to this. I'm sure you've all noticed that you probably started getting more nervous as you got older because you became more aware of the competition, the repercussions, and how difficult it is what we're supposed to do. Especially how difficult it becomes when you start to control every little part of it, you know? It's kind of like the centipede learning how to walk again. So everyone will end up going through that transition. I think it's good not to push people into it. It's kind of like if you try to hatch the egg before it hatches itself, the chicken will be dead inside, even if you do it 4 seconds before the chicken is supposed to come out. So it's a very similar thing with kids. If they're not aware of the performance anxiety, don't tell them that they're going to shake. Don't tell them that they might have a memory slip. Because what if that triggers it in them? So be sensitive to that as well. If someone comes to you, if you see that someone's struggling with it, then by all means help them. But sometimes if there is a group of people that maybe half of them haven't quite experienced that, because music is to them, it's still fun. This is not means of making ends meet. It's just fun, and they're having a lot of fun. So when you tell them, when you come in with your awesome tie and you tell them what you're supposed to be feeling, they might be like, well, I'm not feeling that, but maybe I should. And then they start to dig for it, and in no time they might start to feel it. Yeah. So if you see that there is a problem, by all means tackle it. But if you see that the kid is just having a lot of fun, don't give them the symptoms yet.
Good point.
You know, the reason that it's so important to be able to deal with this is because many of you, perhaps either consciously or subconsciously, think that performance anxiety is something that's going to happen to somebody who hasn't completely mastered their art. And imagine if you're nervous now when you go out to play, when you've got an audience that's very friendly, and if you make a little mistake, they don't care. Then imagine if you're famous. Think about what the pressure is there to put on a good performance, because now you've got a bunch of people that paid big money to come in the door, and they expect you to be good. That's where the anxiety will lie. So if you haven't learned to deal with it at this level, it's going to be even more difficult to deal with it at that level.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. I remember Horowitz, to tell you a quick story about Vladimir Horowitz, legendary pianist who was in his late 80s. He was still performing, but I think of all, I'm thinking now of other pianists, but Horowitz had all kinds of issues with nervousness and anxiety. And he always insisted on playing at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He had to have fresh lobster flown in from Maine. You know, he and his wife lived in an apartment, you know, in New York. He had all these things that he demanded, and of course the action on his piano had to be regulated a certain way so that he could just make these huge sounds. I mean, I remember hearing stories about that and how he had a tuner that that came in and did all of that. But he was always frightfully nervous before he went on stage. And when he did a big, it was like a kind of a comeback recital in, I think it was 1963 at Carnegie Hall, and the lines were, going around the block, everybody's standing there waiting to get in. He had a memory lapse, and what was the piece? The Schumann Fantasy in C major, opus 70, big piece. He got to the second movement, everything was fine, and we got to the coda. The coda is very difficult because you know you're going ba-dum, you know, you're doing this all the time, and you have to land on. Well, I mean, you got to get the right notes. But here's a chord, and then a single note, and it gets faster and faster as you get to the end. So he didn't stop, but he played the first 2 or 3 chords a couple times, and then there was like a nanosecond pause, and then he went on. I mean, it happens, you know, and he was, I think, at that point, or even before, one of the great pianists of certainly of my generation, next to Rubinstein and Claudio Arrau, you know, all of these artists, and he panicked, but he kept going. It was one of those special moments, and it's on the recording that he did at Carnegie Hall. I mean, it, you know, they couldn't stop. I mean, of course, the recording technology in the 60s is not what it is, not what it is now. It's like what you were pointing out, where you could just take and edit out if you had a wrong note. Okay, we can fix that, you know. But he was playing live, and they left it on the recording, and I'll never forget it. It was really one of those moments, and you think, well, okay, if he can have a memory lapse, then maybe I shouldn't feel so. Not that he intended for that to happen, but those things do happen. You know, so.
Memory slips are not a demonstrative quality of your musicianship. It's more of a quality of a personality, character, attitude, and the type of day that you're experiencing. Because there are some great performers. They just panic, and this is nothing to do with the way they play their instruments or the way they control their voice. It's just the way they focus their mind and how they respond to the outside factors that get in the way. So this is not a showing quality of the musicianship. It's something else.
Yeah.
But knowing that through musicianship we can alter it by practicing in a different way, by running through things, so that you have the confidence. This is about building confidence again. By knowing that you can go from this end of the rainbow to this end of the rainbow without any gaps in between. When you know that you've done it 15 times in a row, you're a lot more secure rather than knowing that you just can play the passages.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's have some more comments.
Don't force her, she's just having some performance anxiety.
There you go.
I suppose I'd like to ask, because the thing that bugs me the most is I often find myself frustrated with my output just because I'm here and where I want to be is here. Like, the gap between my taste and my ability is greater than I would like it to be. Did any of you suffer with that? Did you ever, and like, when did you bridge the gap from being frustrated with not being where you want to be and being simply unsatisfied?
Wow. That's a biggie. I think we all go through those periods. You know, they say there was something I was going to mention. This thing about positive thinking. I mean, one can't be happy and all the time. I mean, you know, we're affected by everything. You know, what's going on in the world, what's going on in our community, our building, our house. I mean, people that you interact with, conversations. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out there, right? And sometimes it's hard to be positive all the time, or some of the time. Part of the time, I have friends who are like this all the time. I have other friends who are not that way, you know. And then sometimes I'm going, gee, I'd like to cheer you up a little bit. And sometimes you can't do anything, you know, because they're already in a vile mood. I do think that with performing and practicing, you go through periods where you feel like you might not have you might not be at the level where you want to be. You mentioned, how do you go from here to here? And the only word I can use, because it applies to a lot of things that go on, is patience and never giving up. Don't let the frustration with what you're experiencing become part of what you're going to do later on or to get to that higher level. So patience and staying with it no matter what. not giving up. And what happens a lot of times in that process is that you do reach a point where it gets better. Nothing always stays, the same. You can go through moments where you can have, I don't know, several months of just, and nothing is happening. Why? What's wrong? How come I'm not able to play this piece the way I want to? Or how come my practicing is sort of going into the garbage? I'm not getting the results that I want. So you have to look at everything else that's going on in your life, so to speak, and then figure that out. You have to examine everything. They say that if you don't examine your life, then there's issues there. So you have to think about that, and acquire that quality of patience and not giving up. Work out things. Talk with your teacher. Talk with close friends about it. That's also very, very helpful. I know my daughter she's wiser than I am. I always talk to her about a lot of things, and we have good conversation now because she's at that level where we can do that. So she will recommend things that she knows will help. So we have good conversation about anxiety, and about all that stuff. But I think you have to stay with it, and you do reach the point where you can get to the higher level. But it takes time, and it varies from one individual to the next. We can't say that everybody's going to acquire that at the same time and in the same way. So you have to examine your whole life and what's going on that's preventing you from doing that.
Most of the time, our problem is we sell ourselves short. We just don't give ourselves, like I mentioned before, enough credit for what we do well.
Yeah.
And this comes into play a lot in my chosen field of jazz because there's a lot of improvisation involved, and that's a very personal journey. But I noticed when I was younger, I sold myself short a lot because I wanted to sound like Miles, and I wanted to sound like Freddie Hubbard, then I wanted to sound like Woody Shaw, then and all of a sudden, I went out and I had one album out at the time, and I heard a kid play at a high school, and I heard him play some stuff that was unmistakably stuff that I do a lot. And then I found out the kid had the album. And then I said, oh my God, somebody's copying me. And I realized maybe I can be Jeff and I don't have to be Freddie and Miles. And all of a sudden I realized that finding my own voice was a real epiphany for me because I was always, no matter how well or badly I played, I was always trying to measure up to someone else. And then I realized that what was most important was that I used them as influences to build my own voice. And that's one of the reasons I kind of like the music that I play, because of the fact I am allowed to put a lot of my own feelings and life experiences into a song. So just give yourself credit for what you do well. As I said before, demagnify some of those mistakes. Live recordings are not going to be perfect. They just are not. I mean, live recordings and live performances. You can't fix it, but you know what? There's a lot of times that something that you blow way out of proportion as a horrible mistake was not a mistake at all. It was just something you did differently than the way you practiced it. And you perceive it as a mistake, and nobody out there even knew it. And there's some mistakes that people make that people out there don't even know. I doubt very much in the middle of a solo that a lady with white hair in the back row of Daniel Recital Hall is going, oh, he was on that 1-6-5-2. Oh, he did that half-step displacement. He was a super low green instead of an altered scale. I can't believe it. They're not listening to that. She's back there going, that's pretty. So try to understand that what you are blowing way out of proportion might be something that is not even discernible by your audience.
Yeah, they don't listen to that. I can tell you that. We all had that experience. Yeah, if you go about it with that, then it does change the way you think about things. We don't always give ourselves enough credit. I mean, I used to walk around thinking, oh my goodness, Heifetz. I used to listen to a lot of violinists when I was growing up, and I grew up without television, and so my grandfather had a radio, in the kitchen, and so if I was doing my homework, I'd sit there, and Heifetz was just, all this stuff on the radio. I mean, there was like a radio hour, classical music, and it was great. I mean, and I thought, gee, I wonder if I could do that on the piano. I mean, obviously I couldn't, but I used to grow up thinking, gee, I wish I could play that, or I wish I could do that. And call myself trying to imitate Jarvis. I could never play like Jarvis. He was just in a class by himself, you know, so it's nice to listen to those recordings and think about how they might have done things, but I could never play like Jarvis. I mean, and there are many great violinists. He wasn't the only one, but, you know, people talk about him. I mean, I don't know if in your own experience how that all works, but
He got nervous a lot.
he got nervous.
He smoked. He never used to smoke except before concerts, which was very often for him. But he would pace around the dressing room and he would just boss people around, take his anger out on them. But he was the type of aggressive, nervous person before performances. Some people just get very closed up. But he dealt with it by over preparing. And there is something to be said about preparing so that you can play at this level, so that when you get slightly nervous, you're still above what's expected of you for that night. And this is why we have to have a very solid, maybe you never know what's going to happen, but you have to feel like you're over-prepared for things sometimes. There was John Perry, the pianist, he used to have this maxima, you know, you play, when you perform and you're nervous, you will play as if you're 2 years younger than you are right now. So, of course, if you're 16 and you play like you're 14, that's a big gap. If you're 28, you will play like you played when you were 26, that's not such a big gap because you've already done so many performances. So maybe there is some truth to that. You should know that you're not going to sound at your best. And when you're running through, then you get used to the idea that, yeah, some things are just not going to work right now. That doesn't mean that the music should not sound. You should make phrases, you should make beauty, you should search for colors and communicate, regardless of the little things that happen. Because people take your confidence. The confidence is what they're going to remember. They're not going to remember the notes. Not to say anything about their memory, but we're so used to labeling things. So we will label this performance like that, not because of the wrong notes that happen unless there were every other note. It's just the feeling that we got from it. And so when we see something that's careful, we get a feeling that says it's careful. We're not going to remember that it was clean. We're just going to remember that it was reserved.
You know, while you were saying that, it made me think of the fact that almost every trumpet player I know loves Chet Baker. And they loved, and he's a trumpet player with false teeth, or he was. So he obviously didn't have all the stratospheric chops. He didn't have all the flashy technique, but everything he played sounded beautiful and like perfectly chosen notes. And at the end of the day, when somebody plays some amazing technical, you know, feat of acrobatics in jazz, I listen to it one time and I go, wow, and then go put on a Chet Baker. Because I want to hear something that makes me feel good. So it's how you make people feel is a whole lot more important than that note that you missed.
Absolutely.
Or that high note that you scooped into, you meant to hit right on the, you know. It's so much more important what type of feeling you left people with. It's supposed to make people emote, you know.
Yeah, the music is about emotion. And you're there to, well, hopefully to move people. I mean, I remember hearing Rubinstein a couple of times, you know, in my life, and he used to drop notes by the carload, but he gradually, you know, made changes in what he was doing. And, you know, when he was in his 80s, he was playing Heavenly Mozart, you know, it was great. But it just took a while for him to get to that point where, you know, even the wrong notes didn't matter. The audience loved him. I mean, he would walk out and just, you know, you could just see that he was just happy about being there and all of that. But he wasn't always deadly accurate. But he, and I'm sure he got nervous as well. He did a master class when I was a student at Yale. This is back in the 60s. He did a concert which was wonderful. But he made changes as he got older. You know, just in terms of, okay, I've got to do more, I've got to bring more to performance. And so he changed quite a bit. By the time he, before he died, I think it was in his 90s, you know, his eyesight was failing and all of that, but he was still, I think, playing really well, you know. So you have to allow yourself to get to that point where you're not selling yourself short, but having and developing that confidence that you need in order to bring yourself to the next level. and it does take a while. But the reward that you get from allowing yourself to go through that process is terrific. You know, no compromise on that.
So I kind of want to deviate a little bit from the performance anxiety bit, because okay. So the fact that we're all here shows that we love what we do, like we love performing music and whatnot. Now this is more of a question directed towards you, Jeff. You mentioned that you quit trumpet for a year, and it wasn't until you met this elementary school teacher that brought it back. What exactly did he do to bring back your love of playing?
Well, the funny part was my father's a band director and my mother was a choral teacher. And it took somebody from the outside to get me to come back into music because they were just too close. What he did was he allowed, I mean, I kind of alluded to it a little bit, he allowed me to make mistakes. He's an instrument repairman now. He retired from teaching, and I go visit him every time I go back home to Buffalo. And one time he told me about 5 years ago, he says, you know, I used to get really nervous when you came in for lessons. I said, why? He says, because you used to play them better than I did. I had to practice your lessons so that when I played along with you, I could keep up. And I said, I wasn't that good. I was only in 10th grade, come on. And he said, well, yeah, but you know, you were a lot better than you thought you were. That's what we've been talking about here. I was putting myself down and he was trying to build me up. And similarly, in my job here, I spent a whole lot more time trying to tell people that their solo sounded better than they thought it did than telling them it didn't sound as good as they thought it did. We have a bunch of nice people here, so fortunately I'm working harder to build people up and knock them down because they're too cocky. But what he was just a very, very kind person that when I made a mistake, he didn't berate me for it. He didn't call me stupid. He didn't say that I was horrible and I was gonna, you know, you're wasting your mother's money coming and taking lessons with me. That's what this guy said to me. And when I was sight reading poorly, he'd pound his fist on my knee. He was the, you know, principal trumpet player in the Buffalo Philharmonic. And so I just thought, well, you know, he was an authority figure and he played wonderfully. So I figured he was right. I believed him. Well, later on, I find out he got fired from that job, got fired from another orchestra, fired from another orchestra, became assistant director over at Phoenix, got fired from that job. You know, and here I was letting this toxic person take away my love of music. And it was just a person that had true concern for me that made me like it again. He cared about me. And even little kids know the difference. You know the old saying about nobody will care what you say until they know that you care. Well, I really felt like he cared about me, and it made me feel good about myself. And before I was going to get better as a trumpet player, I had to feel at least some pride in myself as a person. After I left that other teacher and quit trumpet, I felt like I was, you know, I had to look up to look down. You know, I was just lower than low. And, you know, it was just a matter of genuine concern. You can't fake that. You can't pretend to be concerned. Because even a second grader can tell if you're faking it, you know. So it was a very simple answer to that, EJ. I just made it sound really long.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. Sorry. He's used to me. Words
Thanks for sharing that. It's really important to have that positive feedback, you know, because I think I remember I wasn't named the teacher of the festival, but I was doing some coaching at one of the major festivals a couple of years back, and this pianist, this guy did a master class. The pianist was young. He could have been, I don't know what, more than 25, something like that. Yeah. Played, you know, the Petrushka, the solo, the 3 movements, it just absolutely just flawed. Musical, you know, and it's, you know how hard it is. I mean, it really has a. So he goes out and he plays, you know, and I guess there must have been about 200 or 300 people in the audience, and so the guest pianist who did the class just berated him, and I mean, it was just, I had to leave the room. I mean, I was really feeling badly for him, you know, because he played so beautifully, and I thought, why didn't he have anything good to say about this young man's performance? I mean, this is a very demanding piece. I couldn't find anything that he did that would have allowed this guy to just so my guess was that probably he had something going on. Maybe he was just angry, and he projected a lot of that onto the performer. I don't know, but it was also inappropriate and also unnecessary, and I didn't have a chance to speak to the pianist, afterward, the performer. But a lot of people, after he got through, he was almost in tears, and so people were going back to tell him, look, this was you played beautifully. Don't let that, affect you. But it's hard not to be affected in a public situation like that. And this guy was just, and he couldn't play it himself. He was trying to demonstrate some of the passage work, and I thought, well, okay, he couldn't do it. And it just really, things like that happen. And I think by now, he's playing really, really well and all of that, but he talked about that experience and shared it in a panel, and very similar to what we're doing right now. But it took months for him to overcome that. You shouldn't be done, you shouldn't be playing, just on and on and on. I couldn't believe it. What am I hearing? I was just in shock, because it was a stellar performance. What else could he have done to make it better? I don't know. I couldn't think of a thing.
At one point, very soon, everybody in this room is going to be a teacher at some level. Whether you're a performer, you're still going to be asked to do stuff like this, or a clinic, or what have you, a workshop, or judging. You're going to have to be some type of an educator. And realizing how easy it is to turn somebody on or off to music puts the onus on us to really, really be careful how we present and how we say things to students of any age. The thing that, simply put, I'm always afraid of what I say because somebody might believe me. And it's true. If I say something the wrong way, that could be the one thing. My daughter was a wonderful flutist as a young girl. By the time she was in 8th grade, she sounded like an angel, By the time she was in 8th grade, she quit. Why? The band director. Bad band director. Because he just didn't care about the kids. He was just putting in his time. He was close to retirement. In fact, he had already retired. He was just doing it with a paycheck, and that just shut her right down. Yet for me, the time when I decided I not only wanted to be in music, but wanted to be an educator in some way, shape, or form, was when my dad took me to a neighboring town, and I saw a clinic by a guy named Don Jacoby, who played both classical and jazz very well. And I realized not only did I want to play well, I wanted to be as good and as much of a motivator as he was. And that happened in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. So we have to be very, very careful about what we say, because whether you can see the look on someone's face or not, like I said, even with little kids, even with adults too, they may be trying to cover up the fact that they don't like what you're saying, or what you're saying is hurting them, but they'll remember it. So we have to be very careful about that, and we got to package things very carefully, because it could be the difference between somebody continuing or not continuing with music.
Yeah, you can give a correction without being hostile.
Yep.
I think I know in my own teaching I can be, they call me tough lady, but I give correction, but I've learned over the years how to do it because I've been teaching for a long time. But I try to put it in especially in master classes where you have, you can talk about other ways to do things, and so let's think about another way to do this, but you don't have to say, wow, that was terrible. You wouldn't. You have to be diplomatic. Even if a performance is not the way you think it should be, there are other ways to say it. And I certainly, in teaching, especially one-on-one, when you're working with a student, you can give a correction, you can talk about a way to do something better, but you don't have to do it in a hostile way, or in a way that humiliates the student, the person that you're working with. I think that's very, very important, because we don't know where that person's journey has been, where it's taken them, and you have to be mindful of that, I think. Especially, like Jeff was just saying, many of you are going to be educators, at some point in your lives. And even if you're not, when you're working in a recording studio, I've worked with some people who I would never want to work with again, even recording, because they come in and they've already got a chip on their shoulder, and they treat you as if, and I want to be around positive people too. So I've had experiences like that in studios where I'm thinking, gee, I don't know if I want to go back there. Because everybody was so uptight and, you know, hostile. I mean, lately, the last couple of years, it hasn't been that way. I work with people that I have worked with that they, you know, that they're all great and they're very creative and all of that, but that has not always been the case.
No.
No, we've all had those experiences as well.
I was asking somebody some advice before I became a full-time educator, and he gave me the advice in a very short, succinct way. He said, you're going to run into two types of people, the people that don't realize how good they are and the people that don't realize how bad they are. And that really is wrong true, because there's a lot of people that, in a kind way, I have to poke a needle in that balloon, and you know, when they think they're a lot better than they are, and you have to humble them for a second and then realize that they've got a little ways to go, and a lot of times they'll become a realist at that moment and then turn on the jets. But more often than not, it's somebody that is not giving themselves enough credit, that you have to give them the impetus to keep working at it and not be a defeatist. You know, they're thinking, oh man, I'll never be able to sound like him. Well, why not? You know, I wonder what he sounded like when he was your age. You know?
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Sometimes it happens in a snap of a finger. I've seen people even in this university where I hear them one year and I go home for the summer and they come back and they're a completely different player over the summer. I didn't even hear that progress during the year, but maybe over the summer when they actually had some time to practice instead of all the other stuff that we make you guys do, right? And they had time to practice and they came back, you know, just a marked improvement. And it surprised the heck out of me the first couple of years that I was here. And then now I'm starting to get to where I'm kind of expecting a little bit.
That happens too.
Yeah.
Have you had that experience with your students?
Yeah, I think it happens sometimes when we have these lessons that are so often students put things together for the lesson because the lesson is coming, and that prevents them from having the time, the opportunity, and the space in their heart to experiment. Whether it's about a different way of thinking, focusing on the music, or maybe something in the physicality of it, how to balance, because it's such a tactile art what we do, you know. And so maybe when they had enough time to experiment, they figured out something, a different way to think of it, a different way to hold their instrument that perhaps allowed them to feel a lot more free, and feeling free is half of it. Yeah, and so all of a sudden the sound is different. I was like, I tried to change this for so long, how come it didn't work?
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes because no comment that we can ever make will help everything. And let's say that there's 100 factors that play into how we're going to end up making sound on our instrument. And you can only mess with 2 or 3 at a time. And sometimes when you mess with 2 or 3, the other 98, they also get messed with in the wrong way. You haven't mentioned them at all. But when the student decides to change something, then they don't alter everything at the same time. They just make positive change, especially when they have enough time to experiment. This is why it's important to spend time in the practice rooms.
Absolutely.
So, I feel like I sometimes experience anxiety, like not just in performance settings, but also on one-on-one private lesson anxiety. And I mean, you know, part of it is like, it could be one reason that I'm not prepared for the lesson, or it could be, it just might be like some sort of off day between myself and my private instructor. How do you go about dealing with that kind of anxiety between you yourself and the private instructor?
You mean the lesson?
Yeah, the lesson.
Like being anxious before a lesson?
Being anxious before and during.
Oh, and during
sometimes
the
after.
I've had that experience with different students. Well, of course, as my colleagues have pointed out, everything starts with preparation. I know from, well, having studied, and we've all had lessons at various points in our lives. I think you really, you have to start with that, and knowing, of course, from the teacher what's expected, but preparing the repertoire, whatever it is that you've been asked to do, whether it's technical or whatever, being really well prepared and doing it a lot, you know, several times. That is or should be enough, but sometimes one does get anxious in the lesson because you you're concerned about wanting to do everything the way the teacher wants you to, or bringing your best effort, putting forth your best effort. But I think preparation is the key, and then allowing yourself even a few minutes before to just exhale, and calm yourself down and think, okay, I'm going in, I'm prepared, I'm really going to just be as calm as I possibly can be given a situation. I've had that problem too. I remember when I started out, when I was in high school, I used to get very anxious in lessons, but I was fortunate in that throughout most of the time when I was studying and when I became professional, I had very good teachers who were empathetic, and they really went to great lengths to be sure that I felt comfortable. And I have to say that does not, as we were all pointing out, that does not always happen. You can have just the opposite, but you have to start with being well prepared, sometimes even playing through things for your friends, going through that, or maybe asking a friend to listen to what you're going to prepare for your lesson. We used to do that, we'd get together after and have a little tea or coffee or something. Oh, I'd like to play this for you, just to see how it goes and tell me what you think, blah, blah, blah. And I did that a lot when I was in high school and college, and some of my friends would play things for me, or I'd play things for them, and we'd have a little discussion about it. We were always talking about music. Those are things that really help, but you have to allow yourself to really be calm when you go in, so that you're not going to let the teacher make you feel uncomfortable. I think
again, it's about being a realist. None of your teachers expect perfection; they expect progress.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
Vince Lombardi. I'm a Packer fan. Vince Lombardi, I quote him a lot. But one of his favorite sayings, and he had many, but it was, "I expect perfection, but I'll settle for excellence." And that makes a lot of sense to me. And it's unrealistic to, I remember going to the teacher that I liked he had this etude that he wanted me to play, or exercise that he wanted me to play in one breath, which was trying to get air management going so I wasn't using up too much air. And I completely felt like I'd let him down, because I played 8 lines and there was 2 lines left to play, and I just was gasping for air, and I felt horrible. And he said, "Great job." And I said, "But I didn't get to the end." He says, "I didn't think you'd get halfway."
Oh, well, there you are. That's a great story.
I made it up.
I think in the spirit of using every opportunity for practical purposes, I would embrace that. Getting nervous for lessons, by all means. I mean, so we're trying to find opportunities to get nervous so that we get used to this feeling and it doesn't bother us anymore, because it's a part of life. If you get nervous for lessons, great. So you have a weekly opportunity to deal with that. No, you see what goes wrong, because, I think it's a problem if you get nervous every time you pick up your instrument. But getting nervous for a lesson, that's good. It's almost like a performance.
That's true.
I think that one is better, because, your livelihood doesn't depend on it. It's not like you're getting nervous for an audition or an important event where someone might not give you the next gig. You're just getting nervous for a lesson. It's perfect. Yeah. I mean, some people try to put a video camera up or recording equipment so that they can get nervous, and of course it makes you slightly more nervous than if you're just practicing by yourself in a practice room. But if you have the opportunity to get nervous for your teacher, yeah. Plus the nervousness doesn't persist, it doesn't stay any more than 10-15 minutes. Sometimes it leaves you after 5 minutes. I mean, the adrenaline can get pumped so much. Yeah, whatever it is, I feel like after 10 minutes of feeling uncomfortable, you're saying, why am I not feeling nervous anymore? Even if there's a huge crowd looking at you. So it's okay, you're not going to be nervous for the whole hour, therefore you'll get a good lesson out of it too. Yeah.
Thank you, yes.
That helps. Well, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Sounds like that's all right.
Okay. Okay,
I'm
so,
gonna get nervous tomorrow morning.
yeah.
I'm starting with a new trainer at the gym,
Oh, my.
and it's a woman. Now the old alpha male thing takes over. I can do this. If you see me walking funny when I come to campus, you know what happens. I can do this.
Of course. Oh, God, the gym. I know we all need to talk about staying in shape, 10,000 steps a day. Oh, well, we're going to compile all this material and get it on the website so that everybody I had a couple of books too, but rather than mention them now, we'll incorporate all that, put it on the and then I'll do the same thing with the breathing exercises that my daughter recommends because I do follow those. So and they're not sophisticated; they're simple things. They're not like anything elaborate. They're just real simple things that you can use before a performance or just when you're kind of in a state where you're chilling out or you just want to relax, or to get yourself calm. They're very simple things. They don't require any extra attire preparation. If you just do even one or two. I know I used to have a problem with flying, and of course if you're going to have any kind of a career, you're going to get on a plane at some point. And I remember I was in Indonesia and I was coming back to the States. That's a long flight because you're halfway around the other side of the world. And we ran into just a terrible storm, and I thought I was never so frightened in my life, and the pilot said, okay, everybody just stay calm, lightning struck the wing, and we're sitting up there going, oh God, and I remember, okay, just breathe, turbulence doesn't have your name on it, this is something you're gonna experience, and I'm okay now, but I think that particular time, a couple of years back, I was just scared to death. When we got to Hawaii, which is about 5-6 hours from, from the West Coast, they let us off. We had like a 3-hour layover, and we were also relieved to get out of the plane because the storm subsided. It was about 45 minutes of just sheer violent shaking, but I got over it just simply by telling myself, okay, you're going to make it. This is not, the plane's not going to crash. Yes, it's bad weather. There's not a darn thing you can do about it. So you have to know that you're going to be okay. So we were relieved, though, when we did get to Hawaii, and we had the layovers. Everybody was able to chill out and have some lunch, and just regroup. So the 5 hours from Hawaii back to Los Angeles was great because by that time, the storm was over, the sun came out, and when we landed, we applauded,
Yeah.
We told them, thank you, way to go. We were just so glad to get out. But that does happen, if you do any kind of air travel, you're not going to run into that. I mean, it happens. You just have to prepare yourself for it and realize that you'll be okay. But it just took a while for me to get over that initial experience. I was scared to death. It happens, Thank you for, thank you for being here. Hopefully we gave you some good ideas.